Hey loves, it's Britt, and in this video I am talking about Mercury quincunx or in conjunct to Neptune in Synastry. This was a request, and this is one that I've been thinking about a lot lately. So you guys are really like in my head because I've been meditating on this one as well, and just how weird it really is to have in synastry. I have it in a relationship, non-romantic right now, and then I also have had it in a romantic relationship before. And it's just, yeah, it's really weird. It's peculiar in the way that it plays out. So the quincunx, or the inconjunct aspect, is essentially an aspect of awkwardness. It's even harder to reconcile than like a square or an opposition, in my opinion, because the two energies just don't see eye to eye. They're almost like total aliens to each other, right? Whereas even, well, the opposition can be quite alike and quite, balancing to our energy. The square is a lot of tension and frustration, but it's more overt. And then the quincunx, or the inconjunct, is going on like under the surface and causing this kind of subtle or underlying tension that we can tend to stuff down until, later on we realize we have some major conflicts going on with how we express ourselves. So in synastry, it can actually be a pretty attractive aspect because there's an element of like the quincunx aspect has an element of like a sixth house or an eighth house energy, and the eighth house is of course fascinating and everybody's obsessed with it in synastry, right? So quincunxes in synastry can be quite attractive and even like sexual and like intense, but they're definitely difficult. And as time goes on, you can see that, yeah, you really don't understand each other, or you've really like blindsided or being blindsided, especially if it's Neptune, right? By, what this person really is or who they are or whatever. So with Mercury to Neptune, the Mercury person finds the Neptune person to be very fascinating, very intellectually stimulating, but also confusing. The Mercury person can feel like the Neptune person has some form of like knowledge or information that the Mercury person wants, but the Neptune person is forever like evasive or avoiding like fully explaining things to them, or at least like explaining things in a clear and concise way. So, like, for example, the Mercury person can be like, hey, Neptune, I want to know about this thing. Can you tell me? And then the Neptune person either like avoids them or goes on to tell them something entirely different, but also very fascinating. And then the Mercury person forgets what the original question was. And then they end up being even more confused by the conversation and the interaction. So it's very interesting. And the funny thing about it is the Neptune person is not consciously trying to be confusing. They're not like, they don't wake up one morning and think, I'm just going to confuse the Mercury person and be like super like all over the place. And like, they're not thinking that, but it's the way that that person's Mercury interacts with their Neptune. It kind of activates this kind of like confused part of themselves as well. So you could really look at like the house and the sign of the Neptune person and see what's going on there to see the kind of energy that the Mercury person is really activating in the Neptune. And, the Neptune person might not even necessarily be like a super Neptunian or Pisces energy otherwise, but when they're communicating with the Mercury person, it's just like we both trigger in each other this kind of confused, muddled, communicative energy. Now, on the positive side, you can definitely feel like this is an extremely telepathic aspect. So even though we don't really know what is going on half the time, there is actually like real insight into each other. And there's a little bit of like an investigative, like, researcher energy of the quincunx aspect. So, like, for collaborating on some sort of project or some sort of effort where we're going deep into the depths of our consciousness and pulling out all kinds of weird stuff that we didn't know was there, this is actually very favorable to have in synastry. In a day-to-day relationship that is romantic, it can be more difficult to discern, what is actually going on with each other. And the Mercury person in the presence of the Neptune person can even become more confused in their thinking about things. They have a really hard time knowing where the Neptune person is really at. And I've actually had this where I thought I had a very intuitive insight to somebody for years, literally over 10 years, this relationship, a good friend. And I had no idea what was actually going on with them over long term. They were actually involved into drugs. How Neptunian is that? I was also Mercury too. And I literally had no idea. And my perceptions of this person, and this is someone I talk to regularly, weekly at least, or even sometimes daily, and I had no idea what was really going on with them. And when I found out that had been going on for so long, 7 years, I was in complete shock and disbelief because my perception of that person was so different from how that person was actually acting in the long term. And I thought I had this very intuitive insight to them, but I was just completely blindsided. So I think in some cases there can be some kind of huge awakening when you, as the Mercury person, see the truth of the Neptune person, and it's oh, that is not what I thought at all. They're far more Neptunian than I ever could have realized, or they're just not even what I thought they were at all. So there's a potential with any Neptune aspect for that to happen, that kind of realization where the rose-colored glasses come off and you're just faced with this person that was not the person you thought at all. Now, in the case of Mercury Neptune, it's often to do with the day-to-day and communication. You thought you were communicating a different way. In some rare cases, this, it could be that person was straight up lying the whole time, and the Neptune person could have been the liar, or the Mercury person could have been a liar as well. That's very common with Mercury Neptune. Or there could just be something very off about the perception of each other, right? And there can be, these huge realizations when you finally come back down to reality with the person and realize who they actually were. And the tricky thing about the Quincunx is that it's much less obvious. Like I said, it takes time, sometimes a lot of time, for you to figure out what's going on. Whereas with the square or the opposition, you're gonna probably figure out you're delusional a little bit sooner, whereas the Quincunx, you kind of stuff it down until it breeds more problems with time and when you finally figure out what's going on here. But yeah, on the positive side, there's no one aspect that is solely horrible, right? There's always a benefit to every aspect. And what I think the benefit is with this one is it really does spiritualize the communication. The Mercury person can really become a lot more thoughtful in the way that they communicate. The Neptune person can also really think the Mercury person is quite intelligent, and they might even be a little bit triggered by the Mercury person's intelligence and wit, and it kind of causes them to stumble or be less sure of themselves and kind of go into a kind of a Neptune fog themselves. But the Mercury person's intelligence, their wit, their day-to-day activities is even sort of grounding for the Neptune person. So in this case, the Mercury person can absolutely have kind of a grounding influence on the Neptune person's day-to-day routines and stuff. And if we're working on something where we are going deep into each other's psyches and we are digging out some traumas or, researching something, a Quincunx like this can really help you see into the unseen. And because the aspect of the quincunx, right? It has this sixth house, eighth house energy. So with Mercury and Neptune, it's like we're really going deep. We're really seeing things that with no other person we would have seen. With no other person we would have realized these things than with this aspect. So you can give it credit for that. You want to really be honest with each other through and through. If you find out you have this aspect in Synastry, you want to tell the truth to each other all the time. Be very clear. And especially the Mercury person who has more of the tendency to be duped by the Neptune person. It could go the other way too, though, because aspects can kind of switch like that. But especially the Mercury person should just be super straight up and say, this is what I'm thinking about you. This is what I'm thinking about our relationship. Am I off here? Is that wrong? Right? And then the Neptune person has the opportunity to be very clear themselves, and they should try to be as clear as possible, even in a way of like translating it down like they're speaking to someone in a different language, not because the Mercury person lacks intelligence, it's the opposite, but because the Mercury person triggers in them this more Neptunian energy, which tends to be more, it's not in the day-to-day, it's more like vague, and it's more connected to like the universal, right? And so they should make an effort to really like, not dumb it down, but like bring it down to earth for the Mercury person who's trying so hard to relate to them and figure out, where they're at. And then, with that, both people making some effort. See, that's the thing with the quincunx too, is like, you do have to put some effort in if you want a relationship to work. The quincunx in itself is so awkward and annoying that like, for it to work in Synastry, we can feel like one person is giving up something, right? Or like we have to really like subdue a part of our personality. Now that it doesn't have to be like that. If we understand what's going on, we can bring it to consciousness and really like choose, like I said, the Mercury person can choose to be very clear. The Neptune person can attempt to be very clear. That is how we can heal this and make something like this work. Now, if this is coinciding with many other Neptune hard aspects, this might be a relationship that you want to run from, because something is very confusing, and yeah, you might wake up one day and be like, wow. But just on its own, or with a few other Neptune aspects, nothing too crazy, you can work it out like how I said. So I'd love to know your experience of this aspect. If you have had it in Synastry, what has it been like for you? Was it completely mind-boggling? I'd love to hear your stories. Okay, sending you all the love, you guys. Hugs. Talk soon.